Okay, welcome back to our organizational behavior class. Now, what we're going to talk about today with regard to management is a really important topic, one that you can't escape. It's everywhere in management, it's everywhere in the world, and that's conflict. How do you manage conflict? What do you do? You know, in the workplace, you're going to have conflict. All sorts of different types of conflict, all sorts of conflict between different people and different organizations and groups and whatever. How do you manage it? Because as much as you want to get more widgets produced and out the door and make more money and get more customers, etc., like that, one of the problems you're going to have is you're going to have conflict. You're going to have conflict within the organization. You're going to have conflict on the outside of the organization. How are we going to manage it? So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at the concept of conflict, and we're going to take a look at a couple of major topics. Let's first take a look at what those major topics are. We're going to take a look at a modern view of conflict. Look at what it used to be, what it is today, etc., modern view of conflict that we have. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move on and we're going to talk about major forms of conflict. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of different forms of conflict, different types of conflict. And then we're going to talk about managing conflict. You know, what can we do with regard to trying to manage conflict that we have. So let's go ahead. Let's start this off and let's see where we can go with it. And to start us off, again, the first major topic that we have for today is we want to take a look at this thing called a modern view of conflict. So under a modern view of conflict, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my goodness, I have about 7. Let's see, 5. No, about 6 major topics I want to raise under it. So let's take a look at the first of these. First major topic that I want to raise for you here is I want to mention to you that this concept of, just definition. So we're on the same page. The definition of conflict, at least according to your textbook. Conflict is a process in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party, whether real or imagined. The negative impact, the opposition that you think is there, it might really be there, or maybe it's a mistake and you're imagining it. So again, definition, conflict is a process in which one party perceives its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party, whether real or imagined. The second major topic that we have with regard to conflict, historical views of conflict. Historical views of conflict. I'm going to give you basically two. I'm going to tell you what it used to be looked at. Historically, this is the way it was. I'm going to tell you where it is today, where people in a more contemporary view are looking at. So let's start off with under historical views of conflict, the old school, the traditional view of conflict. You might recall in some earlier topics on OB, we talked about Taylor and his income approach and all that other stuff and soldiering. Well, Taylor's coming back into this as well. He has a lot to say with regard to conflict in the old school. And basically, the old school of conflict, Taylor's school of conflict is bad, and it must be avoided or quickly resolved. Conflict is bad, it must be avoided or quickly resolved. Now, think about this. This is not only true in the workplace, and a lot of people believe, oh my goodness, conflict, we got to get past that, we got to go on. We're not getting our widgets made or whatever because everybody's fighting over here. We have to get past that. We have to quickly resolve it. And it doesn't necessarily sound bad. And even in your personal life, you probably think that too. You have conflict with somebody. Usually you don't like conflict. Usually you look at it as being bad, and you're trying to avoid it or resolve it. You're trying to get past it. So that's the old school. The second view of conflict is the newer contemporary view. The newer contemporary view. And this is that some conflict can be good. Some conflict can be good. In fact, having no conflict or really little conflict in an organization can lead to some not necessarily great results. According to your book, if you have no conflict or really little conflict, 4 results could pop up. The first of these, you might have apathy. Nobody cares. Second, lack of creativity. If you have conflict, people tend to try to want to resolve it, creative problem solving, etc. They try to resolve. If I don't have conflict, there's one less reason to be creative. Another bad side of having no conflict is people become indecisive. There's indecision. Well, there's no conflict. I don't have, people arguing part A and people arguing part B. There's no argument. So it might be indecisive. What are we going to do? And lastly, not having conflict or having very little conflict, the textbook says, You can miss deadlines. You can miss deadlines. If there's conflict, we're all on the battlefield, etc., and we're paying attention to things. If there's not conflict, deadlines, we'll get to it when we ever have to. So the newer view says at least some conflict can be good. I think you have to temper this, where how much conflict, what type of conflict, etc. But it's basically saying the old school of always want to get rid of conflict. Maybe that's not right. Maybe as you start to manage today, maybe you shouldn't always try to quell conflict. Maybe you can find that sometimes at least a little type of conflict, a little conflict, might be helpful. So let's take a look. Let's go still under the modern view of conflict. Let's go to the third major topic for today. There basically are two types of conflict that you want to keep in mind. Two types. And I'm going to give you both types and give you a couple of comments for each. And the first type of conflict is called functional conflict. Functional conflict. This is also known as constructive conflict or cooperative conflict. Again, functional conflict. Now, if you have functional conflict, people in an organization don't necessarily get along, etc., but you have this functional conflict, you usually have what are called consultative interactions. The two parties are consulting with one another. They're talking with one another, trying to figure out what's going on, etc. There's some sort of interaction. You have closed doors, etc. There's some sort of action going on. Another aspect of this functional conflict is that the people involved in the conflict, they're focusing on the issues. They're not, you're a schmuck and you're horrible or whatever. They're focusing on the issues. Let's see what we can do to fix this. Who's got the better idea? What can we do, etc. They're focusing on the issues and they're not making it personal. They're not attacking people. Another aspect of functional conflict is there's mutual respect. I disagree with you, you disagree with me, but we still respect one another. If you think about it, go turn on the news. And I don't care if you're red or you're blue, you're liberal, you're conservative or whatever. If you turn on the news, look at how people in one group absolutely have no respect. In fact, a great disdain for people on the other side of the conflict. Well, if you have functional conflict, there's mutual respect. People aren't saying, oh, if you're on that side, you must be a horrible person or whatever. There's mutual respect. Another aspect of functional conflict is there's usually some useful give and take. Okay, listen, I'll tell you what. If you really want this, great. I'll concede to you on this point, but I really want that. So what I want you to do is I'd like you to concede on that point. I'll give you something, you give me something. So you tend to see a useful give and take. It doesn't always have to be one for one or whatever, but there's some give and take going on. It's not everybody's rigid, etc. And then the final characteristic of functional conflict is people tend to feel more comfortable presenting opposing views. It's tough, in organizations and life. A lot of people don't like to present. They like to be quiet, etc. in the background. If you present, if you think about it, one of the problems we have in life is the old concept of a flock of chickens. I'm not sure if you know this about chickens, but there's a pecking order in most flocks of chickens. And the way they do it is most chickens that are, let's say, in a barnyard or whatever, most chickens will keep their heads down because as soon as you look up, the key and top chickens or whatever see that, and all of a sudden conflict, they come and they start pecking and teaching you lessons. In fact, there's a huge number of deaths of chickens because of this pecking order, etc. that they have. So what you find is a lot of chickens, they look down because they don't want to, present, any type of target, so to speak, for someone else. Well, in functional conflict, you're not concerned about presenting, your ideas or whatever. You're more comfortable in presenting those ideas because people aren't going to attack you. They're not going to have that pecking order coming after you as you might have in some other types of conflict. So this concept of functional conflict, cooperative conflict, constructive conflict, whatever you want to call it, it can be good. If people have different views, etc., it can help to bring things together. We talk about the pros of having diversity. Well, having diversity of thought, where we have a conflict of thought or whatever, that can be a pro if it is functional conflict. Well, let's take a look at the second type of conflict. And the second type of conflict is the bad type. type you don't want to have. And it's a type that, well, more often than not, is what we think about when we talk about conflict. It's dysfunctional conflict. Dysfunctional conflict. Dysfunctional conflict can threaten an organization's interests. Everybody's fighting each other, they hate each other, etc., and the emotions are high or whatever. My goodness, that's not going to help the organization. You're not going to get the widgets out the door and new sales and all this other stuff going on. So it can threaten an organization's interests. Another aspect of dysfunctional conflict, which is not good, is it hurts morale. Who wants to work someplace where everybody's fighting all the time, etc.? There might be a couple of people that like that type of stuff, but most people don't want to go into an environment where everybody's fighting, etc. It really can hurt morale. And the last aspect of dysfunctional conflict is, obviously, it reduces productivity. We're spending so much energy and time and focus fighting each other that, well, we're forgetting about making those widgets and getting them out and producing them and getting them out the door and getting customers or whatever. So our productivity naturally goes down because of the conflict and the resources, the time, the money, and other things that are going into this conflict. So again, dysfunctional conflict threatens an organization's interests, it hurts morale, and it reduces productivity. So far under the modern view of conflict, we've looked at three major topics, and the last one is functional versus dysfunctional. Let's go to the fourth major topic under the modern view of conflict. And the fourth point that we have under modern view, causes of conflict. Why is there conflict? Why, did you fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend last night? Why did you fight with your mom or dad over the weekend? Why did you fight with somebody or have conflict with somebody in that group meeting you had, or at the football game or something like that? What causes conflict? And the textbook, again, it's focusing primarily on conflict in an organization, in a business or whatever, but I think a lot of these causes of conflict go outside and also impact why we have conflict outside of a company, outside of a business. Your textbook gives 6 causes of conflict. So let's take a look at these 6. The first cause of conflict is inadequate communication. Inadequate communication. Bad communication oftentimes leads to conflict. People say things and our people don't understand it, and I thought you said this, no, I said that, etc. And all of a sudden we have all sorts of people getting upset with regard to each other, and there's no real reason for it. It was just the way it was communicated. It was a poor way of communicating, it wasn't effective, etc. People misunderstood. So one of the main causes of conflict is inadequate communication. Again, if you think about it, when you talk about conflict in marriages, right? Over 50% of the marriages in the United States, end in divorce, and of the other 50%, a lot of them aren't happy marriages. And one of the reasons you have the divorce and the unhappy marriages is you have conflict. And if you listen to most marriage counselors, one of the main reasons they say we have that marital conflict, etc., is we're not communicating with our spouses. We're not very good at it. We don't listen. We talk more than we listen, and other things like that. So again, one of the key causes of conflict is inadequate communication. And in this course, remember, we started this OB course off with what topic? Communication. Communication is so important. And remember also, with regard to that, we talked about the ZAPs and the SAPs, and how you can talk in 2 different ways. One where you zap somebody and you energize them, and others where you sap somebody and you take away their energy and their enthusiasm or whatever. Same goes with conflict. The way you talk, the way you say things, etc., that can either generate conflict or it can actually resolve conflict. Let's take a look at the second cause of conflict, the second of the 6 that the book mentions. Incompatible personalities or value systems. Incompatible personalities or value systems. Let's face it, you might be just a really nice person. You get along with just about everybody. You try to get along with just about everybody. But even in that case, and by the way, you're probably not necessarily in the majority, if you're that type of person. But nonetheless, you try to get along with everybody, etc. But even then, don't you run into people you don't like their personality? Oh, you might avoid the conflict. You might be nice about it, etc. But the chemistry is awful. You two just don't see one another in the same way. Well, incompatible personalities or value systems can also lead to conflict. For example, one of the things that we see, again, I'll go back to marriages, and I don't mean to leave the business realm so often, but I think we can picture it. One of the big reasons that we see a lot of marriages having problems is money. Usually in most marriages, what you'll find is one of the spouses focuses a lot on money. They don't want to spend, they want to save, etc. Where the other spouse doesn't really care that much about money. It's the things that you could buy with it or use it, how you can increase quality of life, etc. Well, right there, we have a different value system. Well, I want to save money. Well, I want to make life better. Well, if I'm making life better, I'm probably spending money. So do you see where we can end up having a conflict? So again, incompatible personalities and value systems can also be a cause of conflict. Let's go to the third cause of conflict. Competition for limited resources. Competition for limited resources. Think about this. Not too long ago, when COVID was new and everybody was afraid and we're all hunkering down and masks and you couldn't go out and everything like that. I'm not sure if you remember this, but there are some immense shortages of things like toilet paper. Do you know that there were fights in grocery stores where people were fighting over toilet paper? They had a huge conflict for toilet paper. Well, why? Well, it was a resource. They needed it. And there weren't many packages of toilet paper, rolls of toilet paper to buy. So people got in a conflict over that. Well, if you can get in a conflict over a shortage of toilet paper, think about getting in a conflict over a shortage of food or a shortage of money, a shortage of opportunities to advance an organization. So again, competition for limited resources. Another one, go to not necessarily using business, but talk about it in a more personal way. Think how often there are huge sibling rivalries. And one of the main reasons that we have those, not there's many, right? But they want the attention of mom and dad. And mom and dad only have a certain amount of time. I can't focus. I have 3 kids. I can't spend all my time with each kid, etc. So what you tend to see is sometimes the kids are fighting over attention, from mom or dad because it's a limited resource. So again, competition for limited resources. And you can see in business where you have limited resources, what are we going to do? Are we going to compete? Is that going to cause conflict? It just might. Let's go to the fourth cause of conflict. Unreasonable deadlines or extreme time pressure. Unreasonable deadlines or extreme time pressure. Let's say that you're at work right now and you're working on a project, etc. In fact, you're working on a dozen projects and your plate is full. You can barely get it done with what you're supposed to be doing, etc. And all of a sudden, your boss comes to you and says, with regard to Project X, I know initially it was supposed to be due in 3 weeks, but you know what? We have to get it in here in 3 days. Can you imagine the pressure that puts you under? Now you're under this pressure. Let's assume it's a big project and your career is riding on it, etc. like that. Now, how am I going to balance things? I got to rearrange things or whatever. That unreasonable deadline, that's going to put pressure on you, and that added pressure is going to cause conflict. And also this concept of extreme time pressure or whatever. Think about this. Think about when you're driving to work or you're driving to school or you're driving to an appointment, you're driving to pick up your date or something like that, and you're running late, right? Think about how you're short-tempered and you're cutting people off and you're doing this, that, and the other, and you're using various finger gestures at other drivers, etc. as you're going along. When maybe you normally wouldn't do that, why are you doing it now? The time pressure. I got to get there. I got to get to the soccer game. See, that added time pressure is another cause of conflict. Just 2 more, numbers 5 and 6 of the list of 6 that we have under causes of conflict. The next one is organizational complexity. Organizational complexity. One of the things that you'll find with regard to most entrepreneurial businesses, even those that have been around for a while, we think of an entrepreneurial business that one started yesterday, but there are entrepreneurial businesses that have been started 10, 20, 30 years ago, and they're still running in an entrepreneurial way. One of the things that you tend to find is most entrepreneurial businesses try to run under a lean and mean type of structure. They try not to have all this bureaucracy and all these rules and regulations and policies, etc. And you got to do this, that, and the other. Change the light bulb. I got to get, in some organizations, I got to get 5 people to sign off on it, and then I got to go. If you have an organization that is filled with complexity, it's a bureaucratic organization, that adds more pressure to you, more pressure added to you, and of course you got the time delays and the demands and everything else like that. That's going to increase the causes of conflict and your desire, or maybe the conflict. I gotta get this done, and what rule do I go to next, and who do I do it? And then when you find that you're doing these rules and you're slowing down, then you find one of your competitors in the organization is blowing the rules away and getting done faster. You get really mad at that person. Why aren't you enforcing the rules? Think about it with siblings that you have. Oftentimes in a family, particularly where you have more than just a couple of kids, oftentimes you'll find that there are favorites. Mom and dad favor the baby, the youngest one, or whatever. And and all of a sudden, the older ones have to do all this stuff, and the baby gets away with it. Doesn't have to do half the stuff that the others do. The complexity for the older ones is much higher. And they're older. Maybe they should be able to handle it. But nonetheless, that added complexity, that adds to the conflict. And again, think about in family matters that you have, how sometimes everybody now, because the baby's getting away with it and has an easier job with it, the favorite of this person or that is easier, all of a sudden you're mad at that person. There's a conflict that you have. And the sixth and the final cause of conflict that's mentioned by the book, unmatched expectations. Unmatched expectations. You enter into something. Maybe you enter into a relationship, and maybe it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, a contractual relationship, and you expect certain things. Oh, I'm going here, etc., and I expect this, that, and the other. And those expectations aren't unreasonably based. It wasn't just pie in the sky that you were thinking about, but it's based on things that people said to you and you read and whatever. And you go in, all of a sudden, your expectations aren't met. Wait a minute, you said I was supposed to get paid, $10.50 an hour. Wait, I'm only getting paid $9.50. What's happening there? What you tend to find is when your expectations are up here, and then when reality is down here, that puts added pressure on you. That indeed is another cause of conflict. Unmatched expectations. We want our expectations fulfilled. We know we don't get everything, but we want to get most. And if I'm not getting it, what is going to happen here? So unmatched expectations can be a cause of conflict. Well, that finishes up the fourth of the, I believe, 6 major topics under the modern view of conflict, and that was causes of conflict. Let's go to the 5th major topic under the modern view of conflict, and this is, why do people avoid conflict? Well, think about it. There are some people that you might know, and I do as well, who love conflict. They're always out there. Now I'm an attorney, right? And an awful lot of attorneys, they're fighters. They want to fight everybody. You get on an elevator one day and someone says something to you, oh, it's a beautiful day outside. Someone who wants conflict says, beautiful day, are you kidding? And then they all of a sudden try to turn even to nice comment in the conflict. So there are some people who seek conflict, but most of us, not so much. Most of us try to tend to avoid conflict, or to pick our battles, so to speak. I don't want to fight everybody. I'll fight this because it's important. It has to do with my job, or I'll fight over there because it's important. It has to do with my kid or something like that. But most of us try to pick our battles because we just don't have the army behind us to fight everybody, everywhere, every moment of the day. So we try to avoid it. So why do people avoid conflict? Well, your textbook says that, let's see here, the textbook has 9 reasons why people avoid conflict. My guess is you can make the list even longer. But these 9 reasons, I think, are pretty important, and you might want to keep it in mind, not only for yourself, because it might be telling you, hey, I'm avoiding conflict, but maybe I shouldn't. Why am I doing this? Well, you might look through this list, etc. Furthermore, as you start dealing with other people, you might find people who avoid conflict, and you might find there are certain reasons they avoid it. And if you want to avoid conflict with them, you might try to focus on this and this particular thing. So let's take a look. Why do people avoid conflict? Why do you avoid conflict? First, people fear harm. Oh my gosh, if I get in this conflict, I might be hurt. Well, if I fight this person down the street, I might be hurt. If I get into this shouting match with somebody, I might lose. If I get into this argument with my boss, I might be fired, etc. People fear harm. You don't always win every conflict. lose. I might be harmed. Is it worth it? You do that cost-benefit analysis and also, risk assessments, all that stuff, quickly in your mind, like split second. Yeah, think about how oftentimes people talk about there are three reactions that people tend to get in a conflict situation: fight, flight, or freeze. Well, one of the things that we see with regard to flight is, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose. Let's take a look at another reason why people fear conflict. They fear rejection. Oh my gosh, if I get into a conflict with you, you're not going to like me. You might kick me out. You might fire me. You might hold me in disdain. You might not get all the benefits others do. I might no longer be an insider with regard to it. So there's a fear of rejection. And go back to when we talked about motivation. Then we talk about motivation. The need for affiliation and the fear of rejection is one of the motivators of a lot of people. Fear of rejection. Let's go to the third reason why people oftentimes will avoid conflict. And this is somewhat related to it: loss of a relationship. Loss of relationship. You really believe in something, and now I'm going to fight, and all of a sudden, we might not be friends anymore. All of a sudden, our romance that we have might be broken off, or marriage might be broken off, or might not be dating anymore. The good relationship we had as boss and employee might not work anymore. So we fear loss of a relationship. Another reason why people fear conflict or avoid conflict is that they fear anger. They fear the anger of other people. Oh my gosh, I don't want to make you angry at me. I mean, think about when you're a little kid. Did you really want your mom or dad to, get angry, really angry, and lose it, etc.? Of course not. And you don't want people to get angry at you. But there's also the fear of not controlling your own anger. I mean, there's an awful lot of people, and I'm guessing many of you in the audience, and I guess me on occasion, at times we just get so mad, we get so angry, we have no anger management, we lose control, etc. So we fear that. We fear anger, either anger from somebody else or even our own anger. Let's go to the fifth reason why people avoid conflict. They fear being seen as selfish. I want this, so, and you want that, so let's fight over it, etc. Well, after I do that, if I do that all the time, aren't you thinking I'm a pretty selfish person? I want everything for me and nothing for you. So some people avoid conflict because they don't want to be looked upon as being a selfish person. Another reason people feel conflict, and this is somewhat related to the anger one, they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. How many times have you said the wrong thing when you're having an argument with somebody? You love somebody, you have a great relationship with somebody, you respect them, they respect you, everything's working out, but you just have this fight one day, this argument that arises and the emotions are going, etc. Have you ever said something that later on you said, oh my God, I can't believe I said it, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it, I shouldn't have said it, etc. You can't put the words back, no matter how you try to do it, you can't put it back. So some people avoid conflict because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Another reason why people avoid conflict, this is number 7 on the list, I think, of 9. They're afraid of hurting somebody. I know one of the things I don't like, I don't like causing anybody to cry or whatever. And, you're talking with somebody, particularly, I oftentimes would be dealing with little kids, on the baseball field that I'd be managing, etc. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want them to be, crying. I didn't want them to, not want to play baseball or anything like that. Sometimes you just don't want to hurt somebody. Maybe it's somebody you really care about. Maybe it's just a stranger, but you just don't like hurting people. I know people, I don't know if it's you or not, they don't even want to step on an ant or swat a fly. They're afraid of hurting those. My goodness, well, they're certainly going to be afraid of hurting a person as well. So the 7th reason why people avoid conflict is they're afraid to hurt somebody. Just 2 more reasons why people fear conflict or avoid conflict according to your textbook. Number 9, kind of related to some of the other things we said here, a loss of intimacy. A loss of intimacy. There are some relationships that you have that are so special. It's intimate, whether it's physically intimate, romantically intimate, emotionally intimate. It's an intimate relationship, and those intimate relationships could take years to build, to develop the trust for that intimacy. and you can lose it all in just a second. And it could be because of some conflict. Maybe you're going to say something wrong. Maybe you're going to get angry or whatever. There could be a loss of intimacy. One of the things they say also, going back to marriage counselors, is one of the reasons we tend to see so many divorces in the United States is one of the spouses holds everything in. And he or she doesn't express to the other spouse, listen, I think you're an SOB or whatever, I didn't like what you did, I think you're being unfair, you're being whatever. They just hold it in time after time after time. And sometimes for good reason. I mean, there's spousal abuse and things like that, but they hold it in. And when that occurs, well, all of a sudden, when they do express their feelings and they explode, when their emotions come out, oftentimes you lose the intimacy that you had with that party. Well, let's go to the ninth and the final reason why, at least according to your textbook, people tend to avoid conflict. And this ninth one is not one that is exceptionally well known. I don't think a whole lot of people would look and say, oh, that's me. But it's there. There's some people who are afraid of winning. They're afraid of winning arguments, or winning too many arguments or whatever. They're afraid of winning. These people feel that they're undeserving. They're oftentimes humble. There are a lot of religious texts and philosophical texts that talk about the importance of being humble, turning the other cheek, so to speak. So some people are afraid to win. If I push it too hard, my goodness, I might win. And I think most people want to win in most cases, but there are times there are some people, they're afraid to win. So those are 9 different reasons or causes of, or reasons why people fear conflict and avoid conflict. So you might think about those, and you can come up with others. And also, as I say, when you're dealing with other people, you might look at these things too, because you might find that the people you're dealing with, they're avoiding conflict because of number 5 or number 3 or whatever it might be, and that might help you to better manage the situation. Well, let's go to the sixth and the final major point under this introductory point, the major point here of a modern view of conflict. The sixth and the final view is desired outcomes of conflict. Desired outcomes. I got into this conflict. Why? What do I want out of it? It's interesting. Some people actually get in a conflict and the fight goes on for so long they can't even remember why they started. They don't even know what they wanted. But for the most part, there are certain desired outcomes of conflict. Your textbook mentions 5. The first, your desired outcome of conflict is to reach an acceptable agreement on good terms. Hey, let's work this out. Something that's going to be acceptable to me, something that's going to be acceptable to you. When we part, we're going to part on good terms, good faith. We're going to come back, shake hands, we'll do work again, do business again in the future. So one of the desired outcomes of conflict is reaching an acceptable agreement on good terms. Another desired outcome of conflict is stronger relationships. Stronger relationships. I remember when I was in school, elementary, it was interesting. I'd see, other friends of mine, get into fights, fist fights with somebody or whatever. And in fact, occasionally I got into something like that. It was interesting, after the fight and everything, and it was all over and pushed aside, and it didn't really matter who won or lost or whatever, eventually a lot of the people who were fighting ended up becoming best friends. And I'm not so sure if it had anything to do with the fighting or not, but certainly another desired outcome of conflict is to build a stronger relationship. Now I understand you better, you understand me better, we have an idea where things are going, maybe in the future we can work together, etc. And maybe because of that, we've built a stronger relationship amongst each other. Let's go to the third desired outcome of conflict, learning. You can learn a lot in conflict. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn a lot about the person or party you're in conflict with. And you can also learn about others. It's interesting when you get in a conflict, it's usually not just you and others. There's oftentimes people, an audience, so to speak, that are watching this. And they have immediate reactions and subsequent reactions, etc. You can learn from that too. You can learn how to avoid conflict, how to resolve conflict, when conflict is good or bad, etc. There's so many things that you can learn from conflict. Oftentimes it's mentioned that we learn more from failure than from success. Well, maybe we can learn from conflict, whether we were successful or failed at it. Maybe we can learn from conflict as well. Let's go to the next desired outcomes. This is number 4 out of 5. Another desired outcome, self-awareness. Now I'm going to know more about myself. I'm going to be more aware about myself. I'll know more about my shortcomings. I'll know more about my strengths. I'll have a better idea of how to deal with people, etc. I'll know more about me. And if I know more about me, that should help me in future conflicts that I get into. And the fifth and the final desired outcome of conflict, according to your textbook, is creative problem solving. Creative problem solving. One of the neatest things that I have seen is oftentimes when there is a conflict and we're trying to figure out how to fix this and what are we going to do, oftentimes people really start to use their mind and their creativity, and they come up with these creative ways to solve the problem, to resolve the conflict, to move forward, etc. Well, another desired outcome of conflict is being able to have those skills of creative problem solving. If you're like most of my students, whether you're a senior graduating tomorrow or whether you're a freshman who is hopeful, 4 years are going to go by and you're quickly and well and you're going to be graduating later, one of the things that a lot of my students do is they look about what can I do to get a better job? How can I boost my resume? Well, a lot of different things you can do, but one of the suggestions I have for you is show on your resume and in your cover letter that you're a creative problem solver. Show aspects of where you've created something, you've solved a problem creatively, etc. Because creative problem solving is one of those talents that most business recruiters are looking for, because they recognize that all the answers are usually not provided to you easily. They're not on your desktop, they're not in the top drawer or whatever. You've got to figure this thing out and be a creative problem solver. If you can show them in job interviews and resumes and other things like that, that you have the ability, you have experience of creatively solving problems, that might help you get a job. So again, under desired outcomes, the fifth and final one is creative problem solving. So that finishes the first major topic of, I believe, the 3 major topics here. That whole topic, and it's a big one, along with, was a modern view of conflict. The next 2 of these major topics I have are a little bit shorter, so you can breathe a little bit easier. You don't have to take as many notes, etc. If you want to go get a drink or something, go get a drink now and have a quick break or whatever and come back. But the next major topic, number 2, the second major topic, are major forms of conflict. Major forms. There's only 4 forms, and they're pretty much self-explanatory. The first major form of conflict is personal conflict. You get into a conflict with somebody based on personalities. It's a one-on-one thing. What do you mean you took my parking spot? No, it's my parking spot. No, I was here yesterday, etc. That type of thing. It's a personal conflict. The second major form of conflict is intergroup conflict. Intergroup conflict. Sometimes you can manage conflict. In fact, you actually structure, things so you have it. Think about, when you have baseball games and football games, etc., and it's one team against the other, and think about the intergroup conflict you have there. Think about in organizations. Let's go to General Motors. General Motors has a number of divisions, right? It has, Chevrolet's one of the divisions, and Cadillac's another division, and a couple of others. Well, they're all fighting over limited resources, etc. Cadillac wants them, Chevy wants them, who's going to get them, etc. So you have this intergroup conflict that you have. The third major form of conflict, cross-cultural conflict. Cross-cultural conflict. My culture says to do this, your culture says to do that. You're wrong, I'm right. No, back and forth, etc. My religion says this, your religion says that. I was always taught to, eat with, my left hand. Oh, yeah, with the right hand, etc. This cross-cultural conflict. Think about it. Sometimes it's even small. It's not necessarily major things of conflict. It's not, one religious group or one national group against another. It can even be smaller. Look on a smaller level. How many of you, when you're dating, some romantic partner that you have, over the holidays, you went to visit their parents and they went to visit your parents. They came to your family, you went to their family during this holiday period. How many times did you see that your partner's family did things a little differently. Maybe it was very formal. They didn't celebrate this holiday or that or whatever. Or maybe it was different. I mean, just on a small level here, I know that with regard to my wife's family and mine, her family, our families celebrate Christmas, and my family always opened gifts on Christmas morning. Her family always opened gifts on Christmas Eve. So you've got that little bit of conflict. How are we going to handle this thing? What are we going to do? So again, you can have this cross-cultural conflict. You have the major ones that you see around the world, but as I say, religious groups and national groups and other things, ethnic groups fighting each other. You can also have it even on a smaller scale as well. And then the final major form of conflict is work-family conflict. Work-family conflict. And this is as you're trying to balance all the demands of work with all the demands of your family, your personal time that you want to have. Go back historically, not too far, and you're going to find that people that were in my generation, the baby boomers, and the generations before that, family became really small in the conflict thing. Priority was work. Whereas beginning towards the end of baby boomers, and then we got into Gen X and Gen Y, the millennials, and now Gen Z, etc., we're seeing that generation after generation is beginning to figure out, hey, no, that family aspect, that personal aspect is important too, really important. So now how do I adjust? What am I going to do? Because I have demands at work, I have demands at home, and all of a sudden there's a conflict. Tonight I have to leave early from work because my kid's playing a soccer match or whatever. I gotta get home from work. Oh no, you don't. There's another memo here you got to type up and send out, etc. Well, there's conflict for you as well. How do you work that out? Well, let's go to the third and final major topic. The second major topic, we just finished, was major forms of conflict. Let's go to the third and final major topic under conflict, and this is managing conflict. Managing conflict. And your textbook has basically three major topics to take a look at. The first is managing functional conflict. Managing functional. Remember, functional, everybody's trying to, resolve things, or we're working together, everybody's kind of happy, let's find some sort of happy medium or whatever with regard to that. A couple of thoughts under managing functional conflict. Textbook has three. First, you want to have a proactive planned in fact, I take it back. You may want to have a proactive planned conflict. You might want to sit back and proactively, listen, I know I'm going to be in conflict with this person. Let's plan it. What am I going to do? And maybe even within your organization, recognizing that it's not necessarily a bad thing to have some type of conflict and try to plan it, etc. I know one of the things that I do in some of my classes is I will have them, I'll have the teams in a class compete against each other to see which team can raise the most money for a charity or something like that. Well, that puts the teams in somewhat of a conflict, right? But it's for a good cause. And this is kind of a proactive type of planned conflict that might help everybody to better understand each other, to work for a good cause, etc., to understand conflict, etc. So functional conflict, you might want to have a proactive type of conflict. You might want to plan it in advance. And you might even want to have this planned conflict and try to get people in a conflict where it's going to be good. Everybody's okay. We're just going to learn about it. Another aspect of functional conflict you might want to use as one of the planned conflicts, one of the games, so to speak, you might want to use that thing about playing the devil's advocate. Playing the devil's advocate. Listen, I know all of us pretty much agree about this, but why don't we take a look and why don't we take sides on this? Listen, Billy and Sally over here, why don't you argue part A, and Tom and Judy over here, why don't you argue negative A? Let's see how it goes. And Tom and Judy, oh no, we like part, that's fine, I understand that.
It's 2 o'clock.
But what we want to do is we want to play devil's advocates, because sometimes when you are forced to put yourself in the position of the other party at the table, of the conflicting party, sometimes when you see things from their perspective, it changes yours, and it will help you with regard to conflict. So playing devil's advocate is not necessarily a bad deal. And the last thought that they have about functional conflict and managing it, they suggest using what's called the dialectic method. The dialectic method, where you create opposing teams and they debate and argue positions. Basically, one of the things you want to do is take a look at your textbook, what's the dialectic method, etc. Karl Marx, when he was coming out with the concept of communism, etc. One of the things he talked about was this thing, the dialectic method. This group does it this way, this group does it this way. Is there a way now we can come up with a third way where we bring it all together, the dialectic method, etc.? So you might want to take a look at that to get an idea. What does that really mean? How can I use that in the workplace? So let's talk about managing conflict. Let's go to managing the second major topic, managing dysfunctional conflict. Managing dysfunctional conflict. There's a couple of thoughts here for you. The first, in a moment, I'm going to bring up on the screen a graphic from your textbook talking about the styles of how people handle dysfunctional conflict. There's certain styles, and when I put this up and you see it, there's like 4 different styles, and there's compromising and everything, high and low and whatever. You might want to take a look at this graphic and get an idea, where do you fall? My normal style for handling dysfunctional conflict is box 3 in the lower part or upper part. That'll help you understand yourself. But also when you get into conflict with somebody else, try to put them into one of these boxes too. Because if indeed you have enough information that you can accurately do that, if you know where they're located and where you're located, that's probably going to be a lot easier for you to manage the conflict. So let me bring up that graphic right now. So if you take a look at that graphic, one of the things you're going to see is that there basically are 4 different styles that people generally use to manage themselves, to work through dysfunctional conflict. Well, people change, and you might find they use a little of this and a little of that, but you'll find that most people tend to fall into one of these styles. One of them is called the problem-solving and integrating type of style. You're looking at, your concern for others is high, but your concern, for yourself is high. You're looking, what can we do? Both parties at the table. Well, is there a way we can bring different parts of this together? Can we solve the problem? This is a very cooperative style of resolving dysfunctional conflict. But another of the styles, another one that's on the cooperative level, is called smoothing or obliging. Here, you're worried about the other party, not so much worried about yourself. Maybe you're really concerned about the other party, or maybe you have low self-esteem, whatever it might be, but you focus a lot on the other party. So someone who's smoothing and obliging tends not to argue a lot. Okay, whatever you want, we'll kind of go with it, etc. And you try to get a little bit of what you want in, etc. But we're going to go mainly with what the other party wants. We're smoothing over the conflict. We're trying to make it obliging with regard to that. Let's go to the lower 2 quadrants here, and both of these are the more uncooperative type of styles that you find that people have. One of them, the one that's on the lower left, is a dominating type of style, of forcing, my way or the highway. I'm telling you this is the way we're going to do it, etc. Very dominating and forcing. Well, their concern for themselves is really high. My way's always right. The concern for others is really low. I don't care about you. You're horrible. You don't know what you're talking about. I've been there, etc. So, and also you probably can see some ego popping into this too, right? So there's that dominating, forcing style. And you'll see this a lot. In fact, I see this an awful lot where people think they can just bully you, and this is the decision we're going to do because that's what I always do, and that's what you're going to do. And be careful about the bullies. They shouldn't always be right. In fact, in many cases, they're wrong. I remember there was an old saying or something along the lines, seldom in doubt, but always wrong. So, this person really believes in what they're saying, but oftentimes they're not right in what they're saying. Well, the last of these 4 styles, another one on the uncooperative level, is called avoiding and passive withdrawal. This is with regard to it, your concern for self is low, your concern for the others is low, in fact, your concern for the whole thing is low, so you tend to avoid this conflict, you withdraw, you're the wallflower, you don't show up for the meeting or whatever, it's not your fight, you don't care. That's also kind of uncooperative, isn't it? Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go their way, you're just not going to go anyway with regard to it. So you find these four styles, and notice towards the middle of the four, etc., we're talking about compromising. The closer you get to that line, the horizontal line, and I guess to some degree the vertical line, the more likely you're going to compromise these various issues that develop. So again, take a look at this. I think this is really cool because you can look at that. I bet you most of you can see yourself on there. Most of you, when you get into that type of dysfunctional conflict, where do you fall? Do you fall in smoothing or dominating, problem solving, avoiding, whatever? And if you know about yourself, that'll help you get an idea of where you are, what's your position in this, what are the tactics you're generally going to use and how they work, etc. And then also, if you can then plot the parties that are on the other side of the conflict, where they are, that also is going to help you. If you know them and know yourself, the odds are you're going to end up coming through this conflict a little bit better. You're going to know things better. So still under this concept of these styles, just keep in mind that there basically are four styles, maybe a fifth with that one in the middle. We have integrating and problem solving, we have dominating and forcing, we have obliging and smoothing, we have avoiding and either passive withdrawal or even active suppression with regard to it. And then maybe the fifth of the styles is a combination of them in the middle where you're compromising. Well, let's go to the final topic for today, the final topic of managing conflict, formal third-party intervention. Sometimes you have conflict, and the two parties that are in conflict, they can't figure it out, they can't work it out, and the conflict goes on. So sometimes you want to go to a third party. Sometimes you're hoping that a third party might add reason and justness to this, fairness or whatever, come up with the right answer, help us to resolve this dispute. And under formal third-party interventions, bringing in a third party to intervene, there basically are two things that are mentioned by the book. The first third party is you can have lawsuits and hire attorneys and go to court. Have that judge and a court and maybe a jury or whatever. You decide. I'll present my best case, the other side's going to present its best case, and you folks decide because we can't figure this out. Of course, that's an unfortunate way to do things because going to court costs so much. It takes so much time, and it costs so much, attorney's fees and other things like that. It's not good. And then also, too, the assumption that the judge that you're going to get or the jury that you're going to get will be reasonable and know what the heck we're talking about is an assumption that is oftentimes not held up by the facts. So be careful about that. The second major point under formal third-party interventions is you can use what is called, here's a buzz phrase for you, alternative dispute resolution. Alternative dispute resolution. It's known by the first letter of each of those. It's an acronym. Some people call it an abbreviation. It's known as ADR, all capital letters. Some people put a period after each one. It doesn't matter. ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution. Your textbook mentions that there's 6 types of these. I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. I'll talk about one or two of them a little bit. The first of these is facilitation. The second is conciliation. The third is peer review. The fourth is what's called an ombudsman. The fifth is mediation. And the sixth is arbitration. Let me just read through those again for those of you who are taking notes as you're writing this down. Facilitation, conciliation, peer review, ombudsman, mediation, arbitration. I just want to focus on the last two just for a couple of comments for you. As an attorney, I'm not a trial attorney. I don't go and litigate. I'm not in a courthouse all the time, etc. In fact, I probably have litigated, been a trial attorney, maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. In fact, the first time I ever did anything, I was a student at Penn State. I was an MBA student. I already got my law degree, passed the bar exam, etc. So I was a licensed attorney. And a girl that I was dating or kind of dating at the time got a parking ticket. If you ever got a parking ticket, your university, etc., if you're a Penn State student, ever got a parking ticket? I mean, if you didn't get a parking ticket, you're one of the few who didn't. And she had her student permit but she was parking in a faculty lot. She went to business school. I was in business school. At that time, we were in another building. We were in what was called the Business Administration Building, BAB. Now it's a Ford building or something like that. She was parked in that parking lot adjacent to the building because she arrived late, etc., and she parked there, etc., and she got a ticket. So she wanted to argue the ticket, and well, she looked at me, what should I do about the ticket? And I looked, I said, you know what, you actually have an argument, because the officer who wrote the ticket checked off, there are a number of things you could check off of why you got the ticket, and checked off that she didn't have a permit. Well, she did have a permit. She had a permit for another lot, but she had a permit. So I said, let's go ahead and let's fight it. So this was the first case that I had. And we went down to the magistrate downtown, I think it was on Atherton Street or someplace around there, etc. And, you know, she gets called up or whatever. Well, how do you plead? Well, I plead not guilty. What do you mean? You know, you have a permit. No, I didn't have I had a student permit, but, and we actually won the case because she did have a permit. She just had the wrong permit. So, you know, one of the things, usually though, court cases aren't that easy. They're not that cheap, etc. So one of the things I suggest to all my students, who then I know are going to be business executives in their future, you might want to think hard about going and using alternative dispute resolution, ADR, and particularly about using mediation on arbitration. Let me tell you a little bit about those. The difference between the two, at least the formal difference. You can have nuances, etc., but the formal difference. In mediation, what you do is the two parties who are fighting each other, generally speaking, they will pick, each one will pick a mediator. I'm going to pick you to mediate. You know, you're, you know, some judge, you're an attorney or something. I'm going to have you mediate. The other party, I'm going to pick you to mediate, and then the two mediators pick a third, and you present your case to the mediators. Oh, you know, this, I did this and it was right. No, you did that was wrong, etc. Present the case, and then the mediators make a decision. Their decision, usually the mediator's decision, is not binding. So it's kind of like a suggestion. This is what we think, you know, based on the fact we think that this side wins, had a better argument, etc. But usually it's not binding. Arbitration, on the other hand, is the same thing. Each party picks an arbitrator. I pick you, and then those two pick a third. And then you present your case before the arbitrators as opposed to mediators. Basically the same thing. They make a decision, but in this case, it is binding on you. A couple of things, and I'll mention now about more arbitration and mediation. I want you to think about this. In mediation and in arbitration, one of the nice things is you pick the decision makers. You pick the judges, whether they're called mediators, arbitrators. You pick the judges. So as opposed to being assigned a judge in a regular court case, you can't pick who you're going to get. And you might get a lousy judge, a good judge. You might be, let's say you have a dispute over computer software. You're a computer software company or whatever. And you get a judge who barely knows how to turn on a computer, doesn't know anything about software. Is that judge going to make a really good decision? I don't know. I'd be a little concerned about that. Whereas in arbitration mediation, you can pick who you want to be a judge, the other party, so you can both pick if you want. People know things about software, etc., and they can pick somebody else who knows about software. So the people making the decision might know more about this than some judge who didn't. Another nice thing about arbitration and mediation as well, you don't have to have an attorney. You should, right? But you don't have to, because the rules and the regulations and the policies and the procedures are not as stringent, as crazy as they are in the court system. The court system has, you know, rules of procedure and rules of evidence that, I mean, literally, you can lock yourself in a library and read books this thick for days and still not know what you're talking about. Whereas when you go into mediation arbitration, there's a lot less with regard to rules of procedure, rules of evidence. Are there rules? Yes, but it's less. You might be able to understand it better. So maybe you can get away without hiring an attorney. I suggest that you do, but if you can avoid hiring an attorney, assuming you know what you're talking about and you're good at making presentations on your own about your case or whatever, you might find that you know, you can save $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 depending on what the legal fees were, and etc. in this case. So you could save some money there on it. Another thing, though, another nice thing about arbitration, and this is particular arbitration, not mediation. I like arbitration because the decisions that are made by the arbitrators normally cannot be appealed. They can't be appealed. Now think about this. Let's say I go to court. Let's say that I initially sue somebody in court. We go to the local magistrate. And let's say that I win. The other party has a right to appeal. They'll take us down to small claims court. So now we go to small claims court. Let's say in small claims court, I win. The other party has a right to appeal. Now we go up to the trial court. We go through the trial court. It's going to take a lot longer, more attorneys, etc., and whatever. Finally go through a trial court. I win. The other party probably can't appeal. We go to the Court of Appeals. Another lengthy time period. More attorney's fees. I win. The other party might be able to appeal. Go to the Supreme Court. More time. More wasted money. Decision. I win. If it's at the state level, maybe they can now move to the federal level and go to the federal Supreme Court. Maybe. It's unlikely. But you see the point? It can go on for forever. Whereas in arbitration, the decision of the arbitrators is usually final. If you can show that someone was bribed or something like that, you probably can appeal it. But outside of that, the decision is final. Even if it's a crazy decision, it's final. And sometimes getting the final decision resolves the dispute. Sometimes now the dispute's over, we can go on with our lives as opposed to we're going to appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal. So there are some good things about arbitration. I suggest that you keep that in mind for your future management and business and executive opportunities and activities that you engage in. Well, that finishes up what I wanted to talk about with regard to conflict. And again, think about this course, organizational behavior. We're talking about an organization, a structure, and the way people behave. We're talking about how to manage, how to lead in these type of situations. Well, show me any organization that doesn't have conflict. So one of the things you're going to find is wherever you get a job, even if you start your own business, you're going to find conflict. Within the organization, outside the organization, the interaction, etc., there's going to be conflict. One of the key talents you need to have in order to be successful is you have to be able to manage conflict. Hopefully some of the materials that we talked about today from the textbook will give you a better idea of some ways to manage conflict. How does it arise? Why do people avoid it? What are ways to solve it, etc. Maybe by thinking about those things, you can come up with a better idea of who you are and how you handle conflict, who the other party is, how he or she handles conflict, and then if you have that better idea of conflict and the parties yourself, hopefully you can get a better resolution, one that at the end either fits both parties, you or whatever, but a better resolution. So hopefully this helped you out. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. As usual, my door is always open to you. Send me an email, whatever. Be glad to chat with you. Hopefully you enjoyed our lecture on conflict. Hopefully you have a good day coming up. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in our next lecture.